A small crowd stood near the bed. There was dead silence in the room. The smell of cut grass and twilight. Everyone gathered looked at the cocoon covered with moss. There was a man inside the cocoon. Two left the room, a man and a woman. The rest of those present, consisting of 3 people in white coats, remained, quietly talking among themselves. After some time, they all gathered in the living room again. No one was going to break the silence. They just looked at each other. The woman in the white coat, a pediatrician, was the first to speak. "Okay, Maria, you can't tell that story again. My colleagues want to know too." That same Maria, having difficulty calming down, nodded, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. Her husband, Vladimir, was sitting nearby, tightly hugging her shoulders with one arm, and every now and then he was spinning in place. He himself could not move away from what had happened. It all happened about a month ago, maybe a little less. Maria began. "Styopa, my boy, was late at school after school. Arriving home, he stated that he had been scratched somewhere at school. The wound on the hand is not deep, but the blood still did not stop. The patch was changed every 10 minutes. Only 2 hours later, the blood stopped flowing. This surprised me. In principle, it is impossible for so much blood to come out of such a wound, but the matter was settled and forgotten. Then, instead of the usual scab, something similar to moss appeared. They thought that there was an infection. This mossy abscess was sticking out of the finger, preventing Styopa from doing anything normally. The finger did not bend. We went to the hospital, cleaned it up, and again we tried to clean it up ourselves. And again, over time, my boy began to become overgrown with this moss. He then felt unimportant, weakened by leaps and bounds, until he fell into bed altogether. And so, a couple of days ago, in this cocoon." The men in white coats nodded their heads. A pot-bellied guy, a surgeon, looked ahead, with his hands folded on his stomach, quickly moving his thumbs. And a bespectacled man, an endocrinologist, was quickly writing something down in a notepad. Silence fell again, but this time no one bothered to break it. After leaving the house, the company gathered in the parking lot near the house to discuss the situation. They were not going to get into the car. Despite the wild autumn, cold outside negotiations were most important. "So, colleagues, what are the conclusions?" The man with glasses, Vitali, quickly read the scribbled pages of the notebook, not forgetting to glance at the pot-bellied guy Constantine and the woman Sophia. "It looks like some kind of nonsense," Constantine said coldly, leaning his back against the hood of the car. "If it wasn't true," Sophia said, taking out a pack of cigarettes and a lighter from her trouser pocket. "Is this even possible? An ordinary scratch, but the blood stopped after 2 hours, a strange abscess similar to moss, and then the boy was completely covered with this moss until he became a cocoon. Constantine could not recognize what he saw." "You were there and saw and heard everything." Sophia took a drag on her cigarette, closing her eyes. A difficult case." Vitali hid the notebook in his robe pocket. "Excuse me, are you the same specialists?" A hoarse voice rang out. It turned out to be a middle-aged man. He kept his distance, occasionally glancing around. "Well, let's say. So what?" Constantine asked, sighing heavily. "I saw you leave the Skvortsov's apartment. I just want to tell you something more about this." "About it." Vitali has already shown interest. "I have a similar situation." The man pulled up his sleeves, exposing his hands, covered with grass. "Well," Sophia dropped the cigarette and put on her glasses. "Grass." Vitali carefully touched the hair on the man's arms. "It feels like the same grass that grows on the ground." "I'd rather not touch it." The stranger pulled his sleeves back. "Most likely, it's contagious," Constantine said barely audibly. "Maybe, because many in this house already have this kind of crap." After these words, the man left. "Dad, don't tell me that an incomprehensible epidemic is beginning," Konstantin snorted, heading towards the car. "Most likely," Vitaly agreed, following Kostya. Sophia was in no hurry. She looked at that man until he disappeared behind the house. Then she turned her gaze to the house. "I have a bad feeling," she said in a whisper. These three worked in the same private clinic, which was located on the outskirts of the city, a small building on 2 floors, with little staff and equipment, but everyone worked as best they could. At least none of the patients have complained yet, and so, upon arriving at the clinic, the moss samples were immediately submitted for analysis. We didn't have to wait long. We didn't find anything unusual, just ordinary moss. Everyone was perplexed as soon as they heard the story from Sophia's lips. Nobody, of course, believed it. Even the confirmation of Konstantin and Vitaly did not help. "And where did it take me?" Sophia sat near the door to the apartment. The morning began not with coffee, but with terrible news. Strange vegetation appeared in some parts of the city with human eyes. The very house where Sophia and her colleagues were was covered with moss. In random places there were eyes that opened and closed, living their own lives. As if living moss, he peacefully watched the crowds of people with a silent question: "What do you want from me?" Another similar house collapsed in half, giving more space for the giant mushroom, and he also had human eyes, only one pair. In the private sector, trees with branch arms were found in some houses, and big-eyed bushes and flowers appeared in parks. Sophia has already turned to Kostya and Vitaly. They have also heard about these events. They decided to gather at the clinic to discuss everything. There they looked at them with surprise. Some even asked for forgiveness. We had to close the clinic and organize a general meeting, during which we did not reach a common denominator. This is the first time in the history of mankind that this has happened, and there is no explanation for it. All that remains is to go somewhere higher to understand this situation. Only no one from the top was in a hurry. The government did not sound the alarm. The military only isolated territories with mysterious vegetation from people. But there were more and more such places, as if everything is in order, just some kind of pandemic that can't be fought. "What's going on?" Vitaly was indignant, pacing around the office. "Nobody says anything. All sorts of people walk around here. People in uniform and guys from some laboratories, pretending that everything is fine. But in reality, everything is not so. You know, I would sit on my butt straight and wait for everything to work out," Konstantin said calmly, drinking tea at his table. "You know that quarantine has been announced. They won't let us out of here. I have a wife and children there. What if they need my help?" "That's why there's no need to get married ahead of time," Kostya said sarcastically. "Yes, you." Vitaly hit the table hard, almost breaking through it. "Boys, be quiet," Sophia intervened, looking at the news on the internet. Vitaly looked at the laptop, but didn't look too closely, and Konstantin continued to sip his tea. "I don't think you'll find anything there," said Vitaly. Most likely, sighing heavily, Sophia put down her laptop. The situation was heating up. All we could do was wait for a miracle. Only a completely different kind of miracle happened. It soon became known that, given the spread of a strange disease, human vegetation appeared almost every hour throughout the country. In addition, this disease has spread to some other countries. They talked about this leaf on all channels, which caused a noise and uproar in the hospital, both from patients and from doctors, and people came to the clinic not with complaints of headaches and heart pain, but of strange vegetation on the body. Everything changed dramatically. The city has been quarantined. Now there were no people on the streets, only grass, trees, bushes with human eyes. In just one day, almost half of the houses were destroyed. The roads were covered with a green blanket, and there was freshness in the air. as if in a field, and the chirping of grasshoppers replaced the hum of machines and human hubbub. There were a lot more insects, and they gained a little more in size, the size of an ordinary house cat. Almost the whole world has plunged into grain. No one was released from the clinic. Everyone stayed there. Few were lucky enough to be at home on the day the quarantine was announced. The corridors of the clinic are covered with the roots of human trees, and in addition, you can also find flowers with human eyes. In some of the offices there was grass growing, and among all the green blankets one could see human outlines. The same can't be said about the moss. Only Sophia and Constantine remained. They stood near their colleague. Vitaly almost completely turned into one of the creepy flowers. His body withered, turning into a green leathery stalk, his head swollen and cracked, releasing white petals, literally before our eyes. Vitaly gradually transformed, unable to speak, only silently looking at his colleagues. Are we really left all alone? Constantine turned away, not wanting to look at that terrible picture anymore. Perhaps Sophia followed Kostia's example. It's even somehow creepy from this thought. Maybe it's better for us to leave the clinic. I don't see any point in observing quarantine measures anymore. Well, there is practically nothing left of this world. We've been sitting here for a week. Do you understand perfectly well that we won't last much longer? Or are you afraid? Honestly, I'm afraid. I still can't believe what's happening. There was no need to talk on this topic for a long time. Sophia and Constantine went outside. It was unusual to look at an empty sea covered with greenery. The cars stood in their places, wrapped in roots or stems. The building was practically collapsing. You'll have to wander on your own to feed, Kostya sighed heavily, examining his car, and his transport was no exception. There is nothing more left. Just wander around and try to survive, Sophia said, looking around. Do you think there are still survivors? More likely. I don't think we were the only ones who escaped such a fate. They wandered for a long time, but they never found the rest of the survivors. Either they hid, or really only Constantine and Sophia remained. It seemed as if they themselves were zombies in this abandoned world, wandering aimlessly through the streets of the city. On their way, they came across the most unusual human tree. Human bodies fused together into one large gray trunk. The branch hands twitched and swayed, squeezing and unclenching their fingers. A muffled human chorus came from the tree, so calm, even joyful. The world has come to an end, said Constantine. There is no one left. Even if there is someone alive, they sit somewhere and don't stick their heads out. And in just 2 weeks, everything has grown so much. Sophia was surprised. With every step taken, hope faded away. All around were flowers and mushrooms with human eyes, trees with human trunks, moss and grass with human outlines. Bone? Sophia looked alarmed at the man, pointing to his hand. Noticing that part of his hand was overgrown with moss, Constantine looked at Sophia. You do, only on your neck. Sophia touched her neck and was able to feel several blades of grass. Both looked at each other with surprise and fear. Now it's their turn.